been the carbon tax championed by Trudeau and his economic advisor, Mark Carney, whose only complaint was that the tax was not high enough.
That was Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre at his Canada First rally in Ottawa on Saturday. It's clear he hasn't abandoned his criticism of the carbon tax, but he's put down the axe and he's clearly sharpening his attacks on Liberal leader candidate Mark Carney. According to pollster Nick Nanos, it's a sign that he believes Carney is headed for a coronation.
The Conservatives, for all intents and purposes, have told Canadians Mark Carney is the one to beat. Mark Carney is the one to watch. That Conservative attack does not necessarily convert into delegates and votes in an actual leadership campaign, but is probably indicative of the strength of the Carney campaign right now and the threat that it might pose for the Poilievre Conservatives.
So maybe this isn't a full pivot for Poilievre, but it may just be a Conservative course correction. Let's bring back the front bench. Laura D'Angelo, Shakir Chambers, Alison Gifford, and Laura Stone. Shakir, what do you think of how he is sort of changing his tone now? Is he just trying to sort of really read the room, or is this just zoning in on where he thinks things are going?
I think any political party in Canada has to find a way to talk about Trump or countering Trump in some way. There's obviously a rise in nationalism in our country right now, and I think Pierre just kind of made in that moment. But I don't think he's, discarding anything that he was talking about or stood up for before. The clip you played, I mean, he addressed the carbon tax directly and what that would mean for Canadians. So I think that's still a part of his core message. I think, again, and the key for the carbon tax is it has been turned into a matter of affordability for Canadians. So at the end of the day, if you want to talk about affordability and how to address affordability, in the eyes of Pierre and his team, getting rid of the carbon tax is still central to that. So you can have Trump on one side and talk about what you do to strengthen Canada, strengthen our sovereignty. At the same time, domestic issues still matter. And I would just say in our last block, we spoke about the Ontario election. If you actually look at the issues that matter to Ontarians, Trump is up there for sure, but cost of living is still the #1 issue people care about. So I think at the end of the day, you can have this dual message and still resonate with Canadians without calling it, this massive pivot. You're meeting the moment where we're at right now.
But Laura D'Angelo, what does this mean when you consider that you have the bulk of the candidates who are running to be the Liberal leader who are moving away from the carbon tax in some form or another, even though, I'll give it to the Conservatives who are saying that Mark Carney is still somewhat wedded to it. What does this mean for that argument as they go forward?
Well, it's an interesting point because right now we're in a world where it looks like consumer carbon pricing is going away no matter what. Most of the Liberal candidates have said that capital gains is probably going to go away. Everyone agrees affordability is the main issue. There's this huge rise in nationalism. All of the candidates are talking about bringing down internal trade barriers. These are all things that Conservatives have been talking about for a long time. And so if there isn't that policy differentiation right now, it really is a popularity contest. And at this moment, even Conservatives who say they're voting for Pierre Poilievre don't really seem to like him. And so where does that distinction come? He also has a Trump problem, not necessarily from a policy perspective, but the way Pierre Poilievre has communicated really up until this speech on Saturday is like Donald Trump. And, he can slap on a red tie, he can trot out a new smile, but he is still going to have that shadow behind him of talking about Canada being broken and Canada first, and this kind of rhetoric that Canadians right now seem quite allergic to.
And Alison, it's interesting because the Liberals are sort of on that track right now, but the NDP have been as well, trying to continually equate Poilievre with Donald Trump. And, we've seen a couple of attack ads come out as well. How effective do you think that'll be for the Canadian elector out there who might be starting to consider where they're going to place their vote, especially when you consider where Jagmeet Singh wants to go with his party and, wants to really sort of place the NDP in voters' minds?
I think it will be effective. I think one of the biggest challenges that Poilievre has been in terms of his demeanor, as we just mentioned here. And so, I think this speech was interesting. It was probably the first time I've seen him be a little bit less immature and maybe rely a little bit less on ninth grade rhetorical devices and rhyming and a little bit more focused on substance. And I thought he communicated very clearly. But I think, I won't be the first to say this. He's always had an inflated lead because people dislike Trudeau. It's not that they liked him. And now that you have that out of the way and that you have the carbon tax out of the way, people are starting to remember, oh, this is the guy who cavorted with the convoy in Ottawa. This is the guy who only gave an interview to Jordan Peterson at the end of the year. Some of these things are becoming more and more uncomfortable. And the more he can't resist his instinct to just not help himself and just be a little nasty, I don't think that that's what we need right now. And it makes him look like an opposition leader, not a prime minister.
It's interesting, Laura Stone, because I remember when you were in Ottawa and we worked together here on the Hill, everybody sort of looked at Pierre Poilievre as the Conservative, basically attack dog, and very effective in that way, extremely effective in the House of Commons, not only under, Stephen Harper, but also going forward under other different leaders, and sort of being that person who could debate in the House of Commons. Do you think we're seeing his team trying to shift him now from, as others were making the point on this panel, from being the sort of perennial leader of the opposition to trying to be more prime ministerial? Do you think that shift is happening as we're watching it?
I think it very much is. I think that's a great point. I think it has been for quite some time where Mr. Poilievre has been very effective in the House of Commons, going after Trudeau, slicing his clips for social media and getting lots of likes. But after a while, people want to hear what you stand for, what you propose. Obviously, the change now of Mr. Trudeau leaving, the Trump threat coming in, he's had to walk a very fine line of criticizing the government, criticizing what he believes how the Liberals have failed, but not looking like he's kowtowing to Donald Trump. And so you've seen him very strongly trying to distance himself from the U.S. president. And the Liberals are clearly trying to link him to the Republicans and link him to what Mr. Trump's demeanor. And so I think this rally and his proposals for how he would respond to the tariffs and what he would do with the money, giving it to business, as he said, nothing would go to the government. And he said he agrees with matching retaliatory tariffs, and kind of had a laundry list of other policies and proposals that he laid out here. I think that's very much him and his team trying to look like, exactly like you said, Mike, like he's not the opposition leader anymore, and he can't be the opposition leader anymore because the House of Commons isn't sitting right now. He's trying to present himself as a leader, as someone that maybe a suburban mom like I am, or people in the Greater Toronto area are looking for someone to vote for. We know that these are swing riding, someone who they're comfortable with, and who feels it represents their values. So I think we are very much seeing a shift to him as taking more of a leadership position.
Shakira, how difficult does that become when you have the Liberals rolling out ads that are literally putting clips back to back of, Donald Trump saying common sense, and then Pierre Poilievre saying common sense, or saying the woke left, and the two of them sort of, echoing each other? How difficult is it for him to try and run away from his past when you have opposition parties, or I shouldn't say opposition parties, when you have other parties putting those out?
Truthfully, I think it's very lazy for people on the progressive side of the spectrum to compare Poilievre and Trump. I mean, they've been comparing every conservative leader to Donald Trump since he became prime minister, and it just hasn't been working. So I'm not sure Canadians are going to buy that. But just on to some of those earlier points that were mentioned, that there's no policy differences between the Conservatives and the Liberals or Mark Carney. I mean, listen, axing the tax is something that Pierre has said since day one. We can sit here and say all the Liberal candidates have said that, but they haven't, right? Mark Carney said that to start. And then he says, we're just going to change the carbon tax. And then last week, he admits that, I'm going to keep the tax, but it's just going to be a marginal cost on Canadians. We're not even sure what that marginal cost looks like. So I think we need to be factually correct on what these leadership candidates are actually saying to Canadians, because there are differences. You have Liberal cabinet ministers now, like Minister LeBlanc, who, all of a sudden they want to do a review of government spending and the size of government. I think, again, Canadians aren't fools. They're not going to sit here and think the Liberals all of a sudden woke up and, oh, my goodness, all our policies are wrong. All our policies are incorrect. Look how unpopular we are. We're going to do all these things. I think one thing that will be on the ballot in the next election is trust. And who you actually going to trust implement the things that they're saying they're going to do. And it's going to be a hard time for the Liberals to convince Canadians. They're going to do all these policies that the Conservatives have been asking for the last 9 years. All of a sudden, they're going to, win the election and do all these things. I doubt Canadians are going to think the Liberals are going to do a 180 in all these policies. So if trust is on the ballot, there's no way the Liberals are going to be convincing.
Laura D'Angelo, I've got about 45 seconds. Do you think the Liberals and their leadership contenders run that risk of all of a sudden abandoning everything that they had promised in the last 6 months or even the last year and looking like they're politically opportunistic?
I mean, I think everyone looks like they're politically opportunistic right now when you have Pierre Poilievre coming out with a huge pivot. But I don't think it's a risk. I think that Liberals are meeting the moment. And Canadians, to Shakir's point, are smart. They know that their governments and their politicians have to change to meet what's happening in the world.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thanks to Laura D'Angelo, Shakir Chambers, Alison Gifford, and Laura Stone.